My name is Sarah Martinez, and I'm 29 years old, running my digital marketing agency from downtown Phoenix. Last Tuesday morning, I walked into my office ready to launch our biggest campaign yet for a chain of local restaurants. $50,000 was sitting in our business account, earmarked for Facebook ads, Instagram promotions, and influencer partnerships. I logged into our banking portal and my blood turned to ice. The account balance read zero. Every single penny was gone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I refreshed the page 3 times, thinking it was a system error. Then I saw the transaction history. Wire transfer, initiated at 2:47 a.m. The recipient name made my hands shake. Jessica Martinez. My own sister had cleaned out my business account while I was sleeping. My phone buzzed with a text from her. Family shares everything right, don't be dramatic about it. I stared at that message, my entire world tilting sideways. 3 years of building this company, sleepless nights, missed dinners, sacrificing everything to create something real, and she destroyed it with a few clicks. But what she didn't know was that I had access to something that would destroy her perfect little world just as completely as she'd destroyed mine. The morning started like any other at Bright Digital Marketing. I'd arrived at 7 a.m., coffee in hand, excited about our largest contract to date. Sunrise Restaurants had trusted us with their quarterly marketing budget, and today was launch day for their summer campaign. The $50,000 in our business account represented months of planning, strategy sessions, and client meetings. It was supposed to transform their social media presence across 12 locations throughout Arizona. I remember settling into my ergonomic chair, pulling up our project management dashboard, and feeling that familiar surge of pride. 3 years ago, I'd started this company in my cramped studio apartment with nothing but a used laptop and determination. Now we had a sleek office space in downtown Phoenix, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and 5 employees who depended on me. Michael, my boyfriend and lead graphic designer, was already at his desk sketching mockups for the restaurant campaign. David Rodriguez, my business partner and closest friend since college, was reviewing analytics from our other clients. The energy in the office was electric. Everyone knew this campaign could catapult us into the major leagues of Phoenix marketing agencies. We'd been competing against firms with decades of experience and million-dollar budgets, but our fresh approach and genuine results had won over the Sunrise Restaurants executives. I'd personally presented to their board 3 times, staying up until 2 a.m. perfecting presentations, researching their target demographics, and crafting strategies that would maximize their return on investment. My sister Jessica knew all of this. She'd listened to me talk about this contract for months, watched me work weekends and holidays to make it happen. She'd even attended our company Christmas party last year, charming everyone with her easy smile and quick wit. My employees loved her, always asking when she'd visit again. David had once joked that Jessica had missed her calling in sales, the way she could make anyone feel like her best friend within minutes. What none of them knew was the real Jessica, the one our family had been enabling for over a decade. At 32, she'd never held a steady job for more than 6 months. She'd bounced from retail positions to restaurant work, to brief stints in office environments, always finding reasons why each workplace was toxic or beneath her potential. Our parents, Robert and Linda Martinez, had watched this pattern repeat countless times but continued making excuses for her. Dad would say she was still finding herself, that some people just needed more time to discover their passion. Mom would slip her grocery money and help with rent, insisting it was temporary support until Jessica got back on her feet. I'd been Jessica's safety net for years without fully realizing it. When she couldn't make rent, I'd get a tearful phone call about unexpected expenses or unfair landlords. When her car broke down, she'd remind me how much I'd accomplished and how a small loan wouldn't even impact my finances. When she wanted to take expensive weekend trips to Las Vegas or San Diego, she'd frame it as necessary self-care, promising to pay me back once she landed her next big opportunity. The amounts started small, maybe $200 or $300 here and there. But over the years, those small loans had accumulated into something much larger, something I'd been too busy building my business to properly track. The family dynamics had been established long before I became successful. Jessica was the charming older sister who could talk her way out of any situation, while I was the responsible one who solved problems and cleaned up messes. Our extended family, Uncle Tony and Aunt Carmen, had always praised Jessica's creativity and social skills while treating my business achievements as a pleasant surprise, as if success in digital marketing was somehow accidental or temporary. They'd make comments about how nice it must be to play on computers all day, completely dismissing the strategy, psychology, and technical expertise required to grow a company in the competitive Phoenix market. Michael had noticed the pattern before I did. He gently pointed out how Jessica's emergencies always seemed to coincide with my major business milestones, how she'd become more distant whenever I celebrated achievements or talked about future plans. But I'd defended her, explaining how difficult it was to find stable work in today's economy, how our family had always looked out for each other. Michael never pushed the issue, but I'd catch him watching Jessica during family gatherings, his expression thoughtful and slightly concerned. That Tuesday morning, as I clicked on our business banking portal, I was thinking about Jessica's latest crisis. She'd called 2 weeks earlier crying about her landlord threatening eviction. Her story had been detailed and compelling, involving a mix-up with automatic payments and a vindictive property manager who refused to accept her explanation. She'd needed just enough to cover the late fees and avoid having an eviction on her record, which would make finding another apartment nearly impossible. The amount was larger than usual, $5,000, but her desperation had seemed genuine. I'd transferred the money from my personal account without hesitation, telling her to pay me back whenever she could manage it. Now, staring at the empty business account, I realized how naive I'd been. The wire transfer had been initiated using our company's online banking credentials, which meant Jessica had somehow gained access to information that should have been completely secure. Our business account required two-factor authentication, multiple security questions, and approval codes that changed every 60 seconds. She couldn't have stumbled into this access accidentally. This had been planned, researched, and executed with a level of technical sophistication that contradicted everything I thought I knew about my sister's capabilities. My first instinct was panic. How would I explain this to David, who'd invested his own savings into our partnership? How could I face our employees, who'd been working overtime on the Sunrise campaign? How would I tell the Sunrise executives that their $50,000 investment had vanished overnight? The professional reputation we'd spent 3 years building could be destroyed in a matter of hours. Word travels fast in Phoenix's business community, and a story like this would follow me for years. But beneath the panic was something else, something colder and more calculating. I'd spent my entire adult
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
life being the responsible sister, the successful daughter, the reliable business partner. I'd absorbed criticism about being too focused on work, too serious about money, too unwilling to take risks for the sake of family harmony. Jessica had always been everyone's favorite, the free spirit who brought laughter and spontaneity to family gatherings. She'd never faced real consequences for her choices because someone, usually me, had always stepped in to prevent disaster. The text message she'd sent wasn't just theft, it was a declaration of war disguised as family loyalty. Family shares everything, right? Don't be dramatic about it. Those words revealed how little she understood about what she'd taken. This wasn't just money, it was my life's work, my employees' livelihoods, my clients' trust, and my future in the industry I'd grown to love. But more than that, it was years of sacrifices I'd made to build something meaningful, something that could support not just me but the people who'd believed in my vision. I thought about all the times I'd canceled personal plans to meet client deadlines, all the vacations I'd postponed to invest in better equipment or training for my team. I thought about the nights I'd stayed up researching industry trends, the conferences I'd attended to network and learn, the risks I'd taken when leaving my stable corporate job to start this company. Jessica had watched all of this from the sidelines, occasionally benefiting from my success, but never truly understanding the work and dedication required to achieve it. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years I'd been sharing everything with Jessica, just never on her terms. I'd shared my income through loans that became gifts, my time through emergency phone calls and crisis management, my emotional energy through constant worry about her well-being. But it had never been enough, because sharing to Jessica apparently meant having unlimited access to everything I'd earned without any expectation of reciprocity or responsibility. David arrived at the office around 8:30, whistling as he carried his usual breakfast of coffee and a breakfast burrito from the food truck outside our building. He'd been in an exceptionally good mood lately, having just gotten engaged to his longtime girlfriend Maria. They'd been planning a modest wedding for next spring, and David had been talking about how the Sunrise contract would help them afford the small ceremony they'd dreamed of. His happiness made what I had to tell him even more devastating. Michael looked up from his design work when he saw my face. He'd gotten skilled at reading my expressions over the 2 years we'd been together, and he immediately saved his work and walked over to my desk. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice quiet enough not to alarm David or the other employees. I showed him the banking portal screen, watching his face change as he processed what he was seeing. His reaction was different from what I'd expected. Instead of shock or anger, his expression became resigned, almost sad, as if he'd been expecting something like this to happen. That reaction told me more about my relationship patterns than any conversation we'd ever had about Jessica. Michael had been watching me enable destructive behavior for 2 years, had probably been waiting for the moment when the consequences became too large to ignore or absorb. He'd never said anything directly critical about Jessica, but he'd made subtle suggestions about setting boundaries, about protecting the business assets, about not mixing family relationships with professional responsibilities. I'd dismissed his concerns as overcautiousness, believing that family loyalty required a certain level of financial vulnerability. Now I understood that Michael had been trying to protect me from exactly this scenario. He'd seen what I'd been too close to recognize, that Jessica's relationship with me was fundamentally transactional, that her affection and family connection were contingent on my contingent willingness to solve her problems without asking difficult questions. The pattern had been escalating gradually, each crisis slightly larger than the last, each solution requiring more of my resources and emotional energy. The worst part was realizing how long this had been building. Jessica hadn't woken up Tuesday morning and decided to steal $50,000 on impulse. She'd been laying groundwork for months, maybe years. She'd been paying attention during my conversations about the business, learning details about our operations and financial systems. She'd been cultivating access to information that would allow her to execute this theft. The technical knowledge required to bypass our security systems suggested she'd been researching and planning for a significant amount of time. This realization shifted something fundamental in how I saw our family dynamics. I'd always believed that Jessica's financial irresponsibility was a character flaw that hurt primarily herself, that my support was helping her avoid consequences that could motivate positive changes. But her actions revealed a level of manipulation and premeditation that transformed her from a troubled sister into something much more dangerous. She'd been studying me, learning my weaknesses, and positioning herself to exploit my love and sense of family obligation. The timing of the theft was particularly cruel. She'd known about the Sunrise campaign launch, had listened to me talk about how important this contract was for our company's future. She'd known that today was supposed to be a celebration, the culmination of months of hard work and strategic planning. By emptying our account on the morning of the launch, she'd ensured maximum damage to both our business operations and my emotional state. This wasn't just theft, it was psychological warfare disguised as family entitlement. But Jessica had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed that I would absorb this loss quietly, that I'd find some way to protect both the business and her reputation just as I'd handled her smaller crises over the years. She'd assumed that my sense of family loyalty would prevent me from taking any action that might expose her behavior or create consequences that she couldn't charm her way out of. She'd built her plan around the belief that I would continue being the responsible sister who cleaned up messes without making waves. What Jessica didn't know was that I'd recently discovered something about her that would change everything. 3 weeks earlier, while helping her move some furniture from storage, I'd accidentally seen documents that revealed she'd been living a completely different life than the one she'd presented to our family. The sister who claimed to struggle with employment and financial stability had been running a surprisingly successful online business, selling handmade jewelry and accessories through social media platforms. Her monthly income from this venture was actually higher than what I paid myself from Bright Digital Marketing. The discovery had initially confused me more than angered me. Why would Jessica hide a successful business from our family? Why continue accepting financial support if she was earning good money independently? Why maintain the pretense of struggling with employment when she'd clearly found a profitable niche? I'd been planning to have a conversation with her about it, to understand her motivations and maybe offer to help her scale her business using my marketing expertise. Now, sitting in my office with an empty business account and her dismissive text message, I understood Jessica's strategy with perfect clarity. She'd been maintaining two separate identities: the struggling younger sister who needed family support and the successful entrepreneur who was building wealth without anyone's knowledge. The hidden business allowed her to accumulate money while continuing to extract resources from me and our parents. She'd been double-dipping, taking advantage of our concern for her well-being while privately building financial security that she had no intention of sharing or even acknowledging. This revelation reframed every conversation we'd had about money, every crisis she'd presented, every emotional manipulation she'd used to secure my support. The landlord threatening eviction, the car repairs that emptied her savings, the medical emergencies that required immediate cash assistance, all of these stories took on a different meaning when I considered that Jessica had been earning substantial income throughout these supposed hardships. She'd been lying to our entire family for years, creating elaborate fictions to maintain access to resources she didn't actually need. But more than that, Jessica had been studying my business model, learning about digital marketing strategies, and observing techniques that she'd then applied to her own hidden venture. The success of her jewelry business wasn't just natural talent or lucky timing. It was built on knowledge she'd gained from watching me work, from listening to my client calls and strategy sessions, from absorbing expertise that I'd shared freely because I thought I was helping a struggling sister learn about potential career options. The $50,000 she'd stolen wasn't just money, it was the final step in a long-term plan to extract maximum value from our relationship while maintaining complete control over information and consequences. Jessica had been playing a sophisticated game, and I'd been an unwitting participant for years. But games require players on relatively equal footing, and Jessica had just made a move that revealed her true hand while assuming I was still playing by the old rules. What she didn't realize was that I'd been learning too, not just about her hidden business but about leverage, timing, and strategic thinking. 3 years of building a marketing company in a competitive market had taught me things about human psychology, information management, and calculated risk that extended far beyond client campaigns and social media algorithms. Jessica had been studying me, but she'd underestimated what I'd learned about reading people, anticipating behavior, and planning moves several steps ahead. The empty business account was a crisis that demanded immediate attention, but it was also an opportunity that Jessica had inadvertently created. She'd exposed herself completely, revealed her true character, and handed me information that could change our family dynamics permanently. The question wasn't whether I would find a way to recover from this theft, but whether I would use what I knew about Jessica's hidden life to ensure she faced appropriate consequences for the first time in her adult life. As I sat in my office watching Michael's concerned face and knowing I'd have to explain this situation to David and our employees within the next few hours, I felt something I'd never experienced in relation to my sister. Instead of the familiar mixture of frustration and protective concern, I felt the cold clarity that came with understanding exactly who I was dealing with and exactly what needed to happen next. Jessica had declared war on my life and business, but she'd chosen to fight someone who'd spent 3 years learning how to win. Parts 2: the investigation and background. The evidence of Jessica's betrayal wasn't just in the empty bank account. Within an hour of discovering the theft, I'd traced the digital footprints she'd left behind. Our business banking system maintained detailed logs of every login attempt, every security question answered, every authentication code generated. Jessica had accessed our account 14 times over the past month, always between midnight and 4 a.m. when she knew I'd be sleeping. She'd been studying our transaction patterns, learning our cash flow cycles, timing her theft for maximum impact. The wire transfer itself told a story of calculated precision. She'd moved the money to an account at Desert Valley Credit Union, a smaller institution that processed transfers more quickly than major banks. The receiving account had been opened 3 days earlier, using an address in Tempe that I didn't recognize, but a reverse lookup revealed it was a mail forwarding service that specialized in helping people maintain privacy for online businesses. Jessica hadn't just stolen the money, she'd created an entire infrastructure to hide it. But the most damaging evidence was in my email system. Our company used Google Workspace for all communications, and the admin dashboard showed that someone had accessed my account repeatedly over the past 2 months. They'd read through client communications, project timelines, financial projections, and strategic planning documents. Every conversation I'd had about the Sunrise campaign had been monitored. Jessica had known exactly how much money would be in our account, exactly when it would arrive, and exactly how long we had before the funds would be needed for ad purchases. She'd also forwarded specific emails to an address I didn't recognize, creating her own archive of our most sensitive business information. Client contact lists, pricing strategies, proprietary marketing techniques we'd developed, competitive analyses, everything that gave Bright Digital Marketing its edge in the Phoenix market had been copied and stored somewhere beyond my control. This wasn't just theft of money, it was corporate espionage conducted by someone I'd trusted with unlimited access to my life and work. The technical sophistication of Jessica's operation contradicted everything I thought I knew about her capabilities. The sister who claimed to struggle with basic job applications had somehow learned to navigate complex banking security, create anonymous financial accounts, and conduct digital surveillance without leaving obvious traces. She'd been systematically studying my business for months, learning not just how to steal from it, but how to potentially compete against it using information she'd gathered illegally. Michael found additional evidence when he checked our shared cloud storage accounts. Someone had downloaded our entire client database 3 weeks earlier, along with every marketing template, strategy document, and creative asset we'd developed since starting the company. The downloads had been spread across multiple sessions to avoid triggering automatic security alerts, showing a level of operational planning that required significant time and research to execute properly. The scope of Jessica's preparation was staggering. She'd created a complete intelligence file on my business operations, financial systems, and strategic advantages. She'd mapped our vulnerabilities, studied our patterns, and positioned herself to cause maximum damage while minimizing her own risk of immediate detection. This level of systematic planning suggested she'd been preparing for this theft for at least 6 months, possibly longer. David arrived at the office during my investigation, carrying his usual coffee and breakfast burrito, completely unaware that our world had collapsed overnight. I'd been dreading this conversation more than any other. David had invested his personal savings into our partnership, had worked countless unpaid hours during our startup phase, and had trusted me to protect the financial foundation we'd built together. His engagement to Maria had filled him with optimism about their future, and he'd been talking about using his share of the Sunrise profits to help pay for their wedding. When I showed him the empty bank account and explained Jessica's theft, David's reaction was unlike anything I'd ever seen from him. He became completely still, staring at the screen for nearly 5 minutes without speaking. When he finally looked up, his expression wasn't angry or panicked, it was devastated. He understood immediately that this wasn't just a financial setback, it was a potential end to everything we'd worked to create. Our other clients would hear about this situation, our reputation would be destroyed, and our employees would lose jobs they'd come to depend on. David's first question surprised me with its tactical precision. He wanted to know exactly how Jessica had gained access to our systems, what information she'd copied, and whether she had ongoing ability to monitor our recovery efforts. His background in cybersecurity from his previous corporate job kicked in, and he began analyzing Jessica's digital intrusion with professional detachment. Within an hour, he'd identified 12 separate security breaches that Jessica had exploited, each one requiring specific technical knowledge that she shouldn't have possessed. The investigation revealed that Jessica's access to our systems had been facilitated by information she'd gathered during family gatherings and casual conversations over the past year. She'd been asking seemingly innocent questions about my work, expressing interest in digital marketing as a potential career path, and volunteering to help with small tasks that gave her opportunities to observe our operational procedures. Every family dinner where I'd answered her questions about social media algorithms, every holiday gathering where she'd watched me respond to client emails, every casual conversation about business challenges had been intelligence gathering for this elaborate theft. Michael discovered that Jessica had been taking photographs of my computer screen during her visits to our office, using a technique called shoulder surfing to capture passwords and security codes when she thought no one was watching. She'd also installed a small recording device near my desk during our company Christmas party, hidden inside a decorative plant that she'd given us as a gift. The device had been recording our conversations, client calls, and strategy sessions for over 4 months, before I'd accidentally discovered it during a routine office cleaning. The emotional impact of realizing how thoroughly I'd been betrayed was almost worse than the financial crisis. Jessica hadn't just stolen money, she'd weaponized my trust, turning every family interaction into an opportunity for exploitation. Every hug, every shared meal, every conversation where I'd opened up about my hopes and challenges for the business had been part of an extended con game, where she'd been playing a completely different role than the one I'd perceived. Our employees began arriving for work around 9 a.m., completely unaware that their jobs were now in jeopardy. I watched them settling into their routines, checking social media metrics for our existing clients, preparing materials for the Sunrise campaign launch, and discussing weekend plans with the casual confidence that comes from believing your employment is secure. The weight of having to explain this situation to people who'd trusted me to maintain stable leadership was crushing. Lisa, our content strategist, had been with us since the beginning and had turned down higher-paying positions at larger agencies because she believed in our company's growth potential. Marcus, our social media specialist, had recently bought his first house using income stability from our company as qualification for his mortgage. Jennifer, our account coordinator, was a single mother who depended on our health insurance benefits to cover her daughter's medical treatments. The theft wasn't just damaging my financial situation, it was threatening the livelihoods of people who'd made life decisions based on trusting my leadership. The Sunrise Restaurant's executives were expecting a status update on their campaign by noon, and I had no idea how to explain that their $50,000 had vanished overnight. The contract we'd signed included specific penalties for delays or failures in campaign execution, and they had the legal right to demand immediate refund of their investment, plus additional damages, if we couldn't deliver on our commitments. The restaurant chain was publicly traded, and their marketing budget was scrutinized by shareholders who expected measurable returns on advertising investments. But beyond the immediate crisis was a deeper recognition of how completely Jessica had outmaneuvered me. She'd understood that stealing a large sum of money would be devastating, but she'd also positioned herself to benefit from the information she'd gathered about our business operations. The client lists, marketing strategies, and competitive analyses she'd copied would allow her to potentially launch a competing agency using our own methods against us. She could contact our clients, offer similar services at lower prices, and position herself as a more affordable alternative to the company she'd just sabotaged. The hidden jewelry business I'd discovered weeks earlier now revealed itself as a testing ground for techniques she'd learned from observing my work. She'd been practicing digital marketing, social media management, and customer relationship building using her own small business as a laboratory. The success of her jewelry venture hadn't been natural talent. It had been industrial espionage disguised as family interest in my career. She'd been stealing my expertise for years, applying it to her own projects, while maintaining the pretense of financial struggle to continue extracting direct monetary support. Jessica's text message that morning, "Family shares everything, right? Don't be dramatic about it," revealed the full scope of her calculated manipulation. She'd been sharing my business intelligence with her own ventures while positioning herself as the struggling sister who needed ongoing support. The sharing had always been completely one-directional, with me providing resources, knowledge, and emotional support, while she gathered intelligence and built her own competing capabilities. The psychological sophistication of Jessica's long-term strategy was almost impressive in its thoroughness. She'd maintained two completely separate identities for years, playing the role of struggling sister with our family while building genuine business success through stolen expertise. She'd managed information flow carefully, ensuring that our parents and extended family never learned about her profitable jewelry business, while she continued accepting financial support based on fabricated hardships. Michael found evidence that Jessica's jewelry business was actually much larger than I'd initially realized. She'd been operating under multiple business names, selling through various online platforms, and generating revenue that likely exceeded what David and I were earning from our marketing agency. Her social media following for the jewelry business was substantial, built using growth techniques that were virtually identical to strategies we developed for our clients. She'd been beta testing our proprietary methods on her own audience before we'd even begun implementing them professionally. The irony was bitter and complete. While I'd been working 18-hour days to build a legitimate business that could support multiple employees and serve clients ethically, Jessica had been building a more profitable operation using stolen intelligence and deceptive practices. She'd been operating with the advantage of zero research costs, no development time for original strategies, and no ethical constraints about how she acquired competitive advantages. David's investigation into Jessica's financial activities revealed that she'd been planning this theft as part of a larger business strategy. The $50,000 wasn't just money she wanted for personal use, it was seed capital for expanding her hidden business operations into direct competition with our agency. She'd been preparing to launch a full-service digital marketing company using our client lists, our proprietary strategies, and our reputation as stepping stones to establish her own market position. The wire transfer to Desert Valley Credit Union was just the beginning of a complex financial structure Jessica had created to support her expansion plans. She'd opened business accounts at 3 different banks, established relationships with freelance contractors who could provide services we offered, and even begun preliminary conversations with some of our existing clients about potential partnership opportunities. She hadn't just stolen money, she'd stolen our entire business model and was preparing to execute it as competition against us. This revelation shifted my understanding of Jessica's motivations from opportunistic greed to strategic business warfare. She hadn't taken the money because she needed it, she'd taken it as part of a calculated plan to destroy our company while simultaneously launching herself as our replacement in the Phoenix market. The theft was designed to cripple our ability to fulfill existing contracts, while she positioned herself to capture our clients and market share. The sophistication of Jessica's planning suggested she'd been working with advisors or partners who understood business strategy, competitive intelligence, and market positioning. The technical aspects of her digital intrusion, the financial structure she'd created, and the timing of her market entry plans all indicated coordination with people who had professional experience in corporate espionage or hostile business takeovers. My sister hadn't just betrayed me personally, she'd recruited help to execute a comprehensive assault on everything I'd worked to build. Michael discovered communications on our company computer that revealed Jessica had been in contact with former employees from larger marketing agencies in Phoenix, people who'd been laid off or fired and might be willing to work for significantly reduced compensation in exchange for opportunities to damage their former employer's competitive position. She'd been assembling a team of disgruntled industry professionals who could provide credibility for her new venture while harboring resentments against established agencies like ours. The emotional manipulation Jessica had used on our family was just one component of a much larger deception that extended into professional networks and business relationships throughout Phoenix. She'd been introducing herself at industry events as my business partner rather than my sister, implying that she had ownership stakes and decision-making authority in our company. She'd been building a professional reputation based on our achievements, while positioning herself to claim credit for successes she'd had no role in creating. David found evidence that Jessica had been meeting with potential investors, presenting business plans that incorporated our proprietary strategies and client success stories as if they were her own innovations. She'd been seeking funding for her marketing agency launch using materials stolen from our operations, falsifying her role in our company's development, and misrepresenting her qualifications and experience to secure financial backing for direct competition against us. The scope of Jessica's deception extended to our extended family and personal relationships. She'd been telling people that she was essentially running our marketing operations, that I was more of a figurehead who handled administrative tasks while she provided the creative vision and strategic planning that drove our success. She'd been systematically undermining my reputation while building her own, preparing the ground for a public launch where she could position herself as the real talent behind our company's achievements. The theft of $50,000 was just the opening move in what Jessica had planned as a complete takeover of our market position, client relationships, and professional reputation. She'd been preparing to announce her own agency launch simultaneous with our failure to deliver on the Sunrise contract, timing her market entry to maximize the damage to our credibility while establishing herself as a reliable alternative for clients who'd been disappointed by our sudden inability to fulfill commitments. But Jessica had made one critical miscalculation in her elaborate planning. She'd assumed that I would react to the theft with the same pattern of quiet damage control that I'd used for her smaller crises over the years. She'd expected me to find some way to cover the missing money, absorb the business damage privately, and avoid creating family conflict that might expose her broader deception. She'd built her entire strategy around the belief that I would prioritize maintaining family harmony over protecting my business interests or seeking justice for her betrayal. What Jessica didn't know was that discovering her hidden jewelry business weeks earlier had already begun changing my perspective on our family dynamics and my own patterns of enabling behavior. I'd been questioning the narratives she'd maintained about her financial struggles, wondering about inconsistencies in her stories, and beginning to recognize signs of manipulation that I'd previously dismissed as natural family complexity. The theft wasn't just a financial crisis, it was confirmation of suspicions I'd been developing about Jessica's true character and motivations. Rather than devastating me with surprise, it crystallized my understanding of who I'd really been dealing with and what kind of strategic response her actions demanded. She'd revealed herself completely, exposed her vulnerabilities, and provided me with information that could be used to ensure she faced appropriate consequences for the first time in her adult life. The empty business account represented a crisis that demanded immediate attention, but it also represented an opportunity that Jessica had inadvertently created. She'd assumed that I would be too shocked, too focused on damage control, and too committed to maintaining family relationships to mount an effective counterattack. She'd underestimated what 3 years of building a business in a competitive market had taught me about strategic thinking, timing, and the kind of decisive action required when someone declares war on everything you've worked to create. As I sat in my office, surrounded by evidence of Jessica's systematic betrayal, and knowing that I had to make decisions that would determine whether our company survived or collapsed, I felt a cold clarity settling over me. The sister who'd spent years positioning herself as the struggling family member who needed ongoing support had just revealed herself as a sophisticated opponent who'd been planning my professional destruction for months. The game she'd been playing was much larger and more dangerous than I'd realized, but she'd just made a move that exposed her entire strategy while assuming I was still playing by rules that no longer applied. Jessica had declared war on my business, my employees' livelihoods, and my professional reputation, but she'd chosen to fight someone who'd spent 3 years learning how to identify opportunities in crisis situations, how to turn disadvantages into strategic advantages, and how to execute complex plans under pressure. The theft of $50,000 wasn't just a betrayal, it was the opening move in a conflict where Jessica was about to discover that she'd seriously underestimated her opponent and the resources I was prepared to deploy in response to her aggression. Part 6: Miney, the relationship conflict and strategic planning. The relationship with Michael had evolved into something deeper than romance over our 2 years together. He'd become my strategic partner, the person who understood both my emotional vulnerabilities and my professional ambitions with equal clarity. While other boyfriends had been intimidated by my business focus or resentful of the time I invested in building the agency, Michael had embraced the complexity of loving someone whose work was inseparable from their identity. He'd learned to read the subtle signs that indicated whether I needed encouragement, practical support, or simply space to process challenges without interference. That Tuesday morning, watching Michael analyze Jessica's digital intrusion with professional detachment, I realized how thoroughly he'd been preparing for something like this to happen. His questions about security protocols, his systematic review of our digital vulnerabilities, and his immediate shift into protective mode revealed that he'd been anticipating a crisis involving my family's exploitation of my success. He'd never explicitly warned me about Jessica's potential for serious betrayal, but his gentle suggestions about separating business and family finances now seemed prescient rather than overcautious. Michael's background in graphic design included extensive experience with digital security, having worked for several years at a Phoenix tech company that specialized in protecting intellectual property for creative agencies. His technical skills complemented my marketing expertise perfectly, but more importantly, his understanding of how creative businesses could be sabotaged by competitors or disgruntled associates had given him insights into vulnerabilities I'd never considered. He'd been quietly implementing additional security measures for months, creating backup systems and monitoring protocols that were now revealing the full extent of Jessica's espionage. The contrast between Michael's steady support and my family's destructive dynamics had become increasingly apparent over the past year. While Jessica had been positioning herself to steal from my business and Uncle Tony had been making dismissive comments about my career choices, Michael had been building infrastructure to protect what we'd created together. He'd never asked for official partnership status or equity in the company, but he'd invested countless unpaid hours in strengthening our operations and defending against risks that I'd been too trusting to recognize. My parents' reaction to Michael had always reflected their broader inability to recognize genuine value versus superficial charm. They'd been polite to him during family gatherings but consistently suggested that I could do better, that someone with my business success deserved a partner with higher social status or more impressive credentials. They'd never acknowledged that Michael's stability, integrity, and practical intelligence were exactly the qualities that had helped me build something lasting in a notoriously unstable industry. Jessica's hostility toward Michael had been more subtle but equally damaging. She'd made comments about how he was holding me back from dating someone who could really advance my career, how his blue-collar background reflected poorly on my professional image, and how his presence at family events felt awkward because he didn't understand our family dynamics. Her criticisms had always been framed as concern for my happiness, but now I understood them as strategic attempts to isolate me from someone who might interfere with her ability to manipulate and exploit our relationship. The jewelry business I'd discovered in Jessica's storage unit represented more than just financial deception. Her success in building that venture demonstrated that she possessed significant business acumen, marketing skills, and strategic thinking ability that she'd been hiding from our family for years. The discrepancy between her actual capabilities and the struggling persona she'd maintained suggested a level of calculated deception that extended far beyond simple embarrassment about accepting family support she didn't need. Michael had been the first person to suggest that Jessica's frequent financial crises might be manufactured rather than genuine. He'd noticed patterns in her emergencies that seemed to coincide with my major business milestones, her requests for help that often came during periods when I was distracted by work challenges, and less likely to ask detailed questions about her situation. His observations had been subtle and non-accusatory, but they'd planted seeds of awareness that were now blooming into full understanding of Jessica's manipulative strategies. The morning of the theft, as Michael helped me process the evidence of Jessica's systematic betrayal, I realized that our relationship had been tested by my family's dysfunction in ways that most couples never experience. He'd watched me make financial decisions that benefited people who showed no genuine appreciation or reciprocal support. He'd listened to me rationalize destructive behavior from family members who treated him with barely concealed contempt, and he'd maintained his own integrity while supporting me through conflicts that could have easily driven away someone less committed to our partnership. David arrived at our office that morning, carrying more than just his breakfast burrito and coffee. He'd been fielding calls from the Sunrise Restaurant's marketing team since 7 a.m., executives who were excited about seeing their campaign launch and expecting detailed reports on initial performance metrics. His engagement to Maria had filled him with optimism about their shared future, and he'd been planning to use his portion of the Sunrise profits to upgrade the modest engagement ring he'd bought on our startup budget to something more substantial for their wedding ceremony. The devastation on David's face when I explained Jessica's theft was more painful than my own emotional reaction to the betrayal. David had trusted me to protect the financial foundation of our partnership, had invested his personal savings and professional reputation in a business relationship that was now threatened by my family's dysfunction. His immediate concern wasn't about recovering his losses, but about protecting our employees and honoring our commitments to clients who depended on our reliability. David's questions about Jessica's access to our systems revealed his professional background in cybersecurity from his previous corporate position. He'd left a stable, well-paying job to join me in building the agency, believing that our combined skills could create something more meaningful than what either of us could achieve working for larger organizations. His technical analysis of Jessica's digital intrusion was methodical and comprehensive, identifying security breaches that would have been invisible to someone without his specialized knowledge. The scope of Jessica's preparation became clear as David traced her activities through our digital systems. She'd been conducting surveillance for months, mapping our operational procedures, studying our client relationships, and gathering intelligence that would allow her to launch competing services using our proprietary strategies. The theft of money was just one component of a larger plan to systematically dismantle our business while positioning herself to capture our market share. David discovered that Jessica had been creating detailed profiles of our clients, documenting their pain points, budget constraints, and satisfaction levels with our services. She'd been identifying opportunities to approach them with competing offers, using inside knowledge of their specific needs and our pricing structures to craft proposals that would be difficult to resist. The client database she'd copied wasn't just valuable information, it was a roadmap for targeted business theft disguised as competitive marketing. Our employees began arriving for their normal Tuesday routine, completely unaware that their job security had evaporated overnight. Lisa, our content strategist, had been planning to request a salary increase based on her contributions to our recent client successes. Marcus, our social media specialist, had scheduled a vacation day later that week to attend his nephew's graduation ceremony. Jennifer, our account coordinator, had been researching upgraded health insurance options for her daughter's ongoing medical treatments, confident that our company's growth would support expanded benefits. The weight of having to explain this crisis to people who'd built their lives around trusting my leadership was overwhelming. These weren't just employees who could easily find equivalent positions elsewhere, they were team members who'd invested their professional development in learning specialized skills that were particularly valuable within our company culture and operational approach. Lisa had turned down multiple job offers from larger agencies because she believed in our growth trajectory and preferred our collaborative work environment. Marcus had relocated to Phoenix specifically to join our team, leaving family and established social connections in California because he was excited about our company's potential. Jennifer's situation was particularly heartbreaking because she'd been a single mother struggling with unstable employment before joining our team. The reliable income and health insurance benefits we provided had allowed her to create stability for her daughter that had been impossible during her previous series of temporary and part-time positions. Her loyalty to our company wasn't just professional appreciation, it was gratitude for an opportunity that had transformed her family's financial security. The Sunrise Restaurants contract represented more than just our largest client engagement, it was validation that we could compete successfully against established agencies with decades of experience and much larger operational budgets. The restaurant chain's decision to trust us with their quarterly marketing investment had been based on our innovative approach to social media engagement and our demonstrated ability to generate measurable results for smaller clients. Their confidence in our capabilities had opened doors to conversations with other major brands who'd been monitoring our performance. The $50,000 Jessica had stolen wasn't just campaign funding, it was the foundation for expansion plans that could have doubled our company size within 6 months. We'd been preparing proposals for 3 additional major clients who'd expressed interest in our services based on early results from the Sunrise engagement. The success of this campaign was supposed to establish our credibility for handling enterprise-level marketing budgets and complex multi-platform strategies. Jessica's timing had been calculated to cause maximum damage to both our immediate operations and our long-term growth potential. By emptying our account on the morning of the campaign launch, she'd ensured that we would be unable to fulfill our contractual obligations to Sunrise while simultaneously destroying our reputation with potential clients who were evaluating our capabilities. The theft wasn't just about money, it was about sabotaging our trajectory at the moment when we were positioned for breakthrough success. Michael's investigation revealed that Jessica had been in contact with executives at competing agencies, sharing intelligence about our client relationships, pricing strategies, and operational vulnerabilities. She'd been positioning herself as a valuable source of inside information about our company, building relationships with potential employers or partners who could benefit from knowing our proprietary approaches to client acquisition and campaign development. The emails and messages Michael discovered showed Jessica presenting herself as a dissatisfied employee who was ready to move to a competing firm, bringing valuable intelligence and existing client relationships with her. She'd been negotiating potential compensation packages based on her claimed ability to deliver our client list and strategic methodologies to organizations that could use them against us. The theft was coordinated with a broader plan to transition our most valuable assets to competitors who would be positioned to capture our market share. David found evidence that Jessica had been meeting with investors who specialized in funding hostile takeovers of small businesses, presenting business plans that incorporated our operational strategies and client success stories as her own innovations. She'd been seeking capital to launch a competing agency while simultaneously working to destroy our ability to remain competitive in the Phoenix market. The theft was designed to trigger a cascade of business failures that would create opportunities for her new venture to emerge as a credible alternative. The psychological sophistication of Jessica's long-term strategy was more comprehensive than anything I'd encountered in 3 years of competitive business development. She'd been conducting corporate espionage disguised as family interest, building professional relationships based on stolen intelligence, and positioning herself to benefit from our destruction while maintaining plausible deniability about her role in creating the crisis that would enable her success. The hidden jewelry business that had initially confused me now revealed itself as a testing ground for techniques she'd learned from observing our operations. She'd been practicing digital marketing, customer relationship management, and strategic planning, using her own venture as a laboratory for methods she intended to apply on a larger scale. The success of her jewelry business hadn't been natural entrepreneurial talent, it had been industrial espionage disguised as casual interest in my professional expertise. Jessica's ability to maintain separate identities for years while executing this elaborate deception suggested she'd been receiving guidance from people with experience in competitive intelligence, market manipulation, and business warfare. The technical aspects of her digital intrusion, the financial structures she'd created, and the coordination with external partners all indicated a level of strategic planning that exceeded what someone could develop independently without significant resources and professional consultation. Michael discovered communications indicating that Jessica had been working with a business consultant who specialized in helping entrepreneurs launch companies using competitive intelligence gathered from previous employers or business relationships. This consultant had apparently advised her on legal strategies for exploiting information she'd gathered, timing market entry to maximize competitive advantages, and managing the personal relationships that might be damaged by her business activities. The realization that Jessica's betrayal was part of a professionally guided strategy rather than impulsive opportunism changed everything about how I needed to respond to this crisis. She wasn't just a troubled sister who'd made a destructive decision, she was a business adversary who'd been executing a sophisticated plan to steal everything I'd built while positioning herself as my replacement in the market we'd worked to establish. The empty business account was just the opening move in what Jessica intended to be a comprehensive destruction of our company, followed by her emergence as a successful entrepreneur who could provide superior services to clients who'd been disappointed by our sudden failure. She'd been planning this transition for months, building infrastructure and relationships that would allow her to capture our market position while we struggled to recover from the crisis she'd created. But Jessica had made a critical miscalculation in her strategic planning. She'd assumed that I would react to the theft with the same pattern of quiet damage control that I'd used for her smaller crises over the years. She'd expected me to find some way to cover the missing money, absorb the business damage privately, and avoid creating public conflict that might expose her role in our difficulties. Her entire plan depended on my continuing to prioritize family harmony over business interests, just as I'd done when she'd previously created problems that required my intervention to resolve. What Jessica didn't understand was that 3 years of building a business had taught me to recognize the difference between problems that could be managed through accommodation and threats that required decisive defensive action. The theft wasn't just a family crisis that could be handled through private conversation and financial adjustment, it was an attack on everything I'd worked to create, and everyone who depended on my leadership for their professional security. The scope of Jessica's deception and the professional guidance she'd received in planning her strategy meant that this conflict would require resources and expertise that matched what she'd brought to bear against us. The sister who'd spent years positioning herself as someone who needed my protection and support had revealed herself as a sophisticated opponent who'd been preparing for corporate warfare while I'd been focused on building rather than defending what we'd created. Michael's steady presence during this crisis reinforced how completely he understood both the personal and professional dimensions of what we were facing. His technical analysis of Jessica's intrusion, his strategic thinking about how to protect our remaining assets, and his emotional support during the most devastating day of my professional life demonstrated the kind of partnership that Jessica had been trying to undermine for years. Her hostility toward Michael hadn't been about his worthiness as my romantic partner, it had been about his potential to interfere with her ability to manipulate and exploit our relationship. The investigation we'd conducted that morning revealed that Jessica's war against my business had been planned and executed with professional consultation, significant financial resources, and coordination with multiple external partners. She'd assembled a team of advisors, identified vulnerable points in our operations, and positioned herself to benefit from our destruction while maintaining plausible deniability about her role in creating the crisis that would enable her success. As I sat in my office that afternoon, surrounded by evidence of Jessica's systematic betrayal and knowing that our employees, clients, and business partners were depending on my ability to navigate this crisis successfully, I realized that the conflict Jessica had initiated would require strategic thinking and decisive action that matched the sophistication of her attack. The struggling sister who'd spent years accepting my support had revealed herself as a business adversary who'd been preparing for warfare while I'd been focused on growth rather than defense. The game she'd chosen to play was more complex and dangerous than I'd imagined, but she'd made the mistake of assuming that I was still the same person who'd been enabling her dysfunction for years rather than someone who'd learned to recognize threats and respond with appropriate force when everything I'd worked to build was under attack. Parts 1014 Strategic Response and Resolution. The transformation from hurt sister to strategic businesswoman happened in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Sitting in my office that Tuesday afternoon, surrounded by evidence of Jessica's elaborate betrayal, I felt something shift inside me that was both liberating and terrifying. The sister who'd spent years absorbing criticism, enabling dysfunction, and prioritizing family harmony over personal boundaries was gone. In her place was someone who understood that Jessica had declared war not just on my business, but on my identity, my employees' security, and everything I'd sacrificed to build. Michael recognized the change before I did. He'd been watching me process the full scope of Jessica's deception when he quietly said, "You're not going to let her get away with this, are you?" It wasn't really a question. He could see that I'd crossed some internal threshold where the desire to maintain family relationships had been permanently overridden by the need to protect what mattered most. The sister who might have spent weeks agonizing over how to handle this crisis without damaging family dynamics had been replaced by someone who understood that those family dynamics had been weaponized against me. The first strategic decision was information control. Jessica's entire plan depended on maintaining her dual identity as struggling sister and successful entrepreneur while positioning herself to benefit from my business failure. She'd assumed I would handle this crisis privately, just as I'd managed her previous emergencies, without exposing her true situation to our family or broader community. But information was power, and Jessica had just handed me intelligence that could destroy the carefully constructed narrative she'd maintained for years. David helped me compile a comprehensive dossier of Jessica's activities, organizing the evidence of her digital espionage, financial theft, and business planning into a presentation that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. We documented every security breach, every stolen file, every communication with competitors, and every element of her hidden jewelry business that contradicted her claims of financial struggle. The evidence wasn't just proof of theft, it was documentation of systematic fraud that had been ongoing for years. The jewelry business records I'd discovered weeks earlier became the foundation for exposing Jessica's elaborate deception. Michael used his technical skills to research her online presence, discovering that she'd been operating under multiple business names across various platforms, generating substantial monthly revenue while accepting family support based on fabricated hardships. Her social media following for the jewelry venture exceeded 50,000 people, built using growth strategies that were virtually identical to techniques we'd developed for our marketing clients. But the most damaging evidence was in the communications David found between Jessica and her business consultant. These emails revealed not just the scope of her planning but her complete lack of remorse for the damage she intended to cause. In one message, she'd written about how satisfying it would be to watch me struggle after years of what she called my arrogant success. Another email discussed strategies for timing her market entry to maximize the psychological impact of her emergence as a competitor while I was dealing with business failure. The consultant had advised Jessica on legal strategies for exploiting information gathered from family relationships, recommending specific timing and methods for corporate espionage that would be difficult to prosecute. These communications provided evidence that her actions weren't impulsive betrayal but calculated business warfare conducted with professional guidance and significant advance planning. The theft was just one component of a comprehensive strategy designed to destroy my company while establishing her as my replacement in the Phoenix market. I spent Wednesday morning crafting my response with the same methodical precision that Jessica had used in planning her attack. The difference was that my strategy would be transparent, legally sound, and designed to expose truth rather than perpetuate deception. While Jessica had been operating in shadows and lies, I would bring everything into the light where her actions could be evaluated by people who understood the difference between legitimate competition and fraudulent theft. The first target was our extended family, people who'd been unknowingly enabling Jessica's deception by providing emotional and financial support based on false information about her circumstances. Uncle Tony and Aunt Carmen had been contributing to Jessica's rent and living expenses for months, believing she was struggling to establish stable employment. Our parents had been supplementing her income regularly, worried about her ability to maintain basic financial security while she searched for career opportunities that matched her potential. I created a detailed presentation showing Jessica's actual financial situation, including screenshots of her successful jewelry business, bank records demonstrating her substantial monthly income, and evidence of the infrastructure she'd built to compete directly against my company, using stolen intelligence. The presentation wasn't designed to humiliate Jessica but to ensure that our family understood the true nature of the situation they'd been unknowingly supporting through their misplaced concern and generosity. The psychological impact of this revelation on our parents was immediate and devastating. Mom called me within an hour of receiving the presentation, her voice shaking as she tried to process how completely she'd been manipulated. She'd been losing sleep worrying about Jessica's financial stability, had been cutting back on her own expenses to provide additional support, and had been feeling guilty about my success while her older daughter appeared to be struggling. Learning that Jessica had been financially secure while accepting assistance based on fabricated hardships shattered Mom's fundamental assumptions about family relationships and trust. Dad's reaction was different, but equally profound. His pride in Jessica's social skills and natural charm had always contrasted with his more cautious appreciation of my business achievements. He'd never fully understood what I did professionally, but he'd respected the results and financial stability I'd created. Discovering that Jessica had been using stolen intelligence from my business to build her own competing venture while maintaining a facade of struggle and dependence triggered a level of anger I'd never seen from him before. Uncle Tony's response revealed how extensively Jessica's deception had affected our broader family network. He'd been providing monthly financial assistance for over a year, believing he was helping his struggling niece maintain basic housing and transportation while she developed job skills and searched for stable employment. Learning that his generosity had been subsidizing someone who was actually earning more money than he made at his own job created a sense of betrayal that extended far beyond simple financial manipulation. The business community response was equally swift and decisive. Within 48 hours of my documenting Jessica's corporate espionage and sharing that information with relevant professional networks, she found herself facing consequences she'd never anticipated. The consultant who'd been advising her on competitive intelligence strategies immediately terminated their relationship when confronted with evidence of industrial espionage. Several potential investors she'd been courting withdrew their interest after learning about the fraudulent methods she'd used to develop her business plans. Most significantly, the competing agencies she'd been providing with intelligence about our operations suddenly became much less interested in her services once they understood that associating with her could expose them to legal liability for receiving stolen proprietary information. The Phoenix business community was smaller and more interconnected than Jessica had realized, and her reputation for unethical business practices spread quickly through professional networks where trust and integrity were fundamental requirements for long-term success. The Sunrise Restaurant's executives, who'd been preparing to terminate our contract and demand refund of their investment, became much more sympathetic to our situation once they understood that we'd been victimized by sophisticated corporate espionage rather than simple mismanagement. The detailed documentation we provided about Jessica's theft and the professional guidance she'd received in planning her attack demonstrated that we'd been targeted by someone with significant resources and expertise in business warfare. Michael's technical analysis of our security systems had revealed vulnerabilities that were exploitable only by someone with inside knowledge and sustained access to our operations. This evidence helped establish that the theft wasn't the result of negligent security practices, but rather sophisticated infiltration that would have been difficult for any small business to detect or prevent without specialized cybersecurity resources. David's financial projections for recovery showed that we could restore full operations within 60 days if we could secure bridge funding to replace the stolen campaign money. His presentation to Sunrise included detailed timelines for campaign execution, alternative strategies that could achieve their marketing objectives within their original budget, and risk mitigation measures that would prevent similar security breaches in the future. The bridge funding came from an unexpected source. One of our existing clients, a local restaurant chain that had seen dramatic revenue increases after implementing our social media strategies, offered to advance payment on their next quarterly contract to help us maintain operations during the crisis. Their owner had heard about our situation through industry networks and wanted to support a team that had delivered exceptional results for his business. Additional support came from Michael's professional network in the Phoenix tech community. His former colleagues at the cybersecurity firm, where he'd worked before joining our agency, offered to implement enterprise-level security systems for our business at no charge, recognizing the value of having a case study in small business protection that they could use to demonstrate their capabilities to other potential clients. Jessica's criminal exposure became apparent as David worked with our attorney to evaluate legal options for recovering the stolen funds and protecting our intellectual property. The wire fraud charges alone carried significant federal penalties, but the corporate espionage and theft of proprietary business information added additional layers of potential prosecution. The evidence we'd compiled documented violations of multiple state and federal laws related to computer crimes, identity theft, and fraudulent business practices. The attorney recommended pursuing both criminal prosecution and civil litigation, explaining that Jessica's actions had created liability not just for the direct theft, but for damages to our business reputation, lost client opportunities, and the costs of implementing additional security measures. The coordination with her business consultant and the targeting of our competitors with stolen intelligence potentially expanded the scope of legal action to include conspiracy charges and civil claims against multiple parties. But Jessica's most significant miscalculation was her assumption about my priorities and response patterns. She'd built her entire strategy around the belief that I would prioritize family relationships over business interests, that I would find some way to absorb the damage privately rather than expose her actions to consequences that might affect her reputation or future opportunities. Her experience with my previous responses to her smaller crises had convinced her that I would continue enabling her behavior even when it escalated to criminal levels. The sister who'd spent years making excuses for Jessica's dysfunction and finding ways to minimize conflict within our family relationships had been permanently replaced by someone who understood that protection of genuinely important relationships sometimes requires exposing and confronting people who exploit family dynamics for personal gain. Jessica had destroyed any possibility of future trust or positive relationship through her elaborate betrayal, making family harmony impossible regardless of how I chose to respond. The transformation in my relationship with Michael became one of the most positive outcomes of this crisis. His steady support during the most challenging period of my professional life, his technical expertise in documenting Jessica's crimes, and his strategic thinking about protecting our business interests had demonstrated the kind of partnership that could weather serious adversity and emerge stronger. The contrast between his loyalty and Jessica's betrayal made me appreciate qualities I'd previously taken for granted. Our engagement happened 3 months after Jessica's arrest, when Michael proposed during a quiet dinner at the same restaurant where we'd processed the initial crisis. He'd been planning it for weeks, but the timing felt perfect because we'd both proven our ability to handle serious challenges together. The ring he'd chosen was simple and elegant, reflecting his understanding that I valued substance over superficial display, commitment over grand gestures. David's wedding to Maria became a celebration not just of their relationship but of our business partnership's survival through the most serious threat we'd ever faced. The crisis had tested every aspect of our professional collaboration, from financial planning to strategic decision-making to crisis management, and we'd emerged with stronger systems and deeper mutual respect. Maria's appreciation for how David and I had supported each other during the crisis added another layer of trust to our extended business family. The employees who'd been threatened by Jessica's attack became more invested in our company's success after understanding how close they'd come to losing their jobs through no fault of their own. Lisa's content strategy work became more innovative as she developed security-conscious approaches to protecting client information. Marcus implemented additional authentication measures for our social media management systems. Jennifer created backup procedures for account coordination that would prevent single points of failure in our client relationships. Our client base expanded significantly after word spread about how we'd handled the crisis with transparency, professionalism, and commitment to honoring our obligations, despite being victimized by sophisticated criminal activity. The Sunrise campaign ultimately exceeded all performance targets, generating revenue increases that justified expanding their marketing budget for the following quarter and referring us to other restaurant chains interested in similar results. Jessica's hidden jewelry business collapsed within 6 months of her criminal charges becoming public knowledge. Her customer base, built largely through social media platforms that required trust and authenticity, abandoned her rapidly once they learned about her fraudulent business practices and criminal conviction. The professional network she'd been building to support her marketing agency launch evaporated when potential partners realized that associating with her could damage their own reputations in the Phoenix business community. The financial restitution Jessica was required to pay as part of her plea agreement included not just the $50,000 she'd stolen, but additional damages for business disruption, security system upgrades, legal costs, and lost opportunities that resulted from her actions. The civil settlement we reached included permanent injunctions preventing her from contacting our clients, using any proprietary information she'd stolen, or entering into competitive business activities that could leverage knowledge gained through her espionage. Our parents' relationship with both Jessica and me underwent fundamental changes that reflected their growing understanding of how family dynamics had been manipulated for years. Dad's pride in Jessica's supposed charm and social skills was replaced by embarrassment about how thoroughly he'd been deceived and anger about the damage her actions had caused to family relationships. Mom's maternal instinct to protect and support Jessica was tempered by recognition that genuine help sometimes requires allowing people to face consequences for their choices. The extended family relationships that had been built on false narratives about Jessica's circumstances and my supposed obligations to support her underwent similar transformations. Uncle Tony and Aunt Carmen became much more appreciative of my business achievements once they understood the work and sacrifice required to build something genuine rather than simply exploiting family relationships for personal gain. Their respect for my professional success was no longer grudging acknowledgement, but genuine admiration for overcoming serious adversity. The Phoenix business community's response to our situation created networking opportunities that accelerated our company's growth beyond what we'd projected before the crisis. Other entrepreneurs who'd faced similar challenges with family members or business partners reached out to share their experiences and offer collaboration opportunities. Our reputation for handling adversity with professionalism and integrity attracted clients who valued those qualities in their service providers. The security systems Michael implemented with support from his former colleagues became a competitive advantage that we marketed to clients concerned about protecting their own proprietary information and business intelligence. Our experience as victims of corporate espionage gave us credibility in advising other businesses about vulnerabilities they might not recognize until they'd been exploited by people with insider access. Jessica's attempts to rebuild her reputation and restart her business activities were consistently undermined by the permanent record of her criminal conviction and the detailed documentation of her fraudulent practices that remained accessible through public court records. The Phoenix business community's memory proved longer and more comprehensive than she'd anticipated, making it impossible for her to re-establish credibility in markets where trust and integrity were essential for success. The personal growth that resulted from confronting and overcoming Jessica's betrayal extended far beyond business or financial considerations. Learning to recognize manipulation disguised as family obligation, developing the courage to expose destructive behavior despite social pressure to maintain harmony, and building the strategic thinking skills necessary to defend against sophisticated threats, all contributed to a stronger sense of personal identity and professional capability. 5 years later, Bright Digital Marketing has become one of the most respected agencies in Arizona, with offices in Phoenix, Tucson, and Flagstaff. Our team has grown to 25 employees, and our client roster includes major brands throughout the Southwest. The crisis management skills we developed during Jessica's attack have served us well in helping clients navigate their own challenges with reputation management, competitive threats, and crisis communication. Michael and I built a life together that balances professional collaboration with personal fulfillment in ways that would have been impossible if I'd continued enabling destructive family dynamics rather than confronting them directly. Our marriage is strengthened by shared values about integrity, hard work, and mutual support that were tested and proven during the most difficult period either of us had experienced professionally. The relationship with my parents evolved into something more authentic and respectful as they learned to appreciate my achievements without the filter of comparison to Jessica's fabricated struggles. Their pride in my success became genuine rather than qualified, and their support became reliable rather than contingent on my continued willingness to subsidize dysfunction within our family system. The lesson that emerged from this experience was both simple and profound. Genuine family relationships are built on mutual respect, honesty, and reciprocal support, not on obligation to enable destructive behavior or absorb consequences that belong to other people. Jessica's betrayal was devastating in the short term, but it ultimately freed me from patterns of interaction that had been preventing authentic connection and genuine mutual appreciation. The sister who'd spent years accepting financial and emotional exploitation in the name of family loyalty was replaced by someone who understood that real love sometimes requires setting boundaries that protect everyone involved from the consequences of unchecked dysfunction. Jessica's criminal behavior wasn't caused by my decision to stop enabling her, but her ability to escalate to more serious crimes was definitely enabled by my previous willingness to absorb smaller consequences without requiring accountability. The business we rebuilt after Jessica's attack was stronger, more secure, and more strategically positioned than what we'd had before, but more importantly, it was built on relationships characterized by mutual respect, shared sacrifice, and genuine appreciation for each person's contributions. The employees who stayed with us during the crisis became partners in creating something that reflected our collective values rather than simply providing income and benefits. The Phoenix community, that had initially seemed threatening when Jessica targeted us for destruction, became a source of support, opportunity, and professional growth that exceeded anything we could have achieved by avoiding conflict and maintaining superficial harmony. The reputation we earned for handling adversity with integrity attracted exactly the kind of clients, employees, and business partners who shared our commitment to building something meaningful and lasting. Jessica's final miscalculation was her assumption that destroying my business would somehow diminish my capabilities or potential for future success. Instead, the crisis she created became an opportunity to develop skills, relationships, and strategic thinking abilities that positioned me for achievements that would have been impossible without the adversity she'd forced me to overcome. The sister who'd been content with modest success became someone capable of building something truly exceptional, not despite her betrayal, but because of the strength that emerged from surviving and transcending it. The empty business account that had seemed like the end of everything on that Tuesday morning became the beginning of something better, stronger, and more authentic than what Jessica had tried to destroy. Her theft wasn't just a criminal act that required prosecution, it was an inadvertent gift that forced me to discover capabilities I'd never needed to develop, and relationships I'd never appreciated fully until they were tested by genuine adversity. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.